Hi, Lauren. I'm so excited. I know we've been talking about doing, oh my gosh, I think we've been talking about this for quite a while now,
A long
but
time.
I'm so
Yeah.
excited that we actually found a date that works. Uh, so go ahead, introduce yourself, what you do, anything else that you want people to know before we get started.
Okay. Well, first, thanks for having me. My name's Lauren Bowers, and I am a registered massage therapist in London, Ontario, who works with horseback riders. So it's very individualized and very much about you and what your needs and wants are. I work with all disciplines, all riding abilities. So some people that I work with are brand new to their sport, some people are high level professionals, and yeah, really individualized about you. So sometimes I'm working on biomechanics, sometimes we're working on preventing injury and using your body more effectively. Other times we're rehabbing injuries because obviously they happen.
Because equestrians.
Yeah, you get on a 1,000 pound animal, it doesn't always go as planned. So yeah, just very much about you and what you're looking to get out of it, and helping to just build a foundation and network around you of health professionals who understand you and your sport and what you want to get out of it.
I think one of the things I've loved talking to you about too, between the two of us, is how you got to this point of kind of what life looked like before, what you thought you wanted, and then realizing that you took a hard 360 and found yourself in a really cool place. So if you don't mind sharing a little bit about how you got to the place that you are now, I love that.
Yeah, for sure. So I've always known I wanted a job to help people. I just didn't really know what that looked like. So I mean, my mom's a social worker and was awesome at her job, so I was thinking that at some point. But especially when I was finishing high school, it's like, okay, where am I going? What am I doing? I started in the kin program at Western because I knew that I found anatomy and things like that really interesting. I've also always been an athlete. So competitive dancer, obviously I'm a competitive horseback rider, skier, golfer, all my hobbies are active ones. So that felt like something that would be kind of a good meshing of my worlds. Started in Canada, it didn't work out at all. And then kind of was in limbo for a while in my undergrad, landed in the health science program, and that ended up being a really good fit. But yeah, obviously, first starting out with a lot of individual sports related stuff, sports injury, sports ethics, etc. And then looking at health as more than just the personal determinants. So in the health science program, it really was also looking at social determinants and community, economical, financial, SES, all the things around you that do actually impact your health outcomes and how. So it opened the door and my eyes to a whole different way to be looking at how to help people. Finished that program and really did like it, but went shit, now what?
Yeah.
And so just wasn't sure what to do next in schooling. And so I just started working. I worked in public health in a lower level admin job, really at a point where it was a lot of system navigation, but got really pigeonholed. So I at first liked it, but then saw no clear way to take this job and transition it to a career. It just kind of muddied the water. And it was at a point in the health system where if you, even when you're not doing stuff patient facing, they wanted only regulated health professionals doing those jobs.
Yeah.
I wasn't one with my undergrad.
Yeah.
So it was even though I had the knowledge base, I wasn't able to apply it without doing way more schooling. And at that point, I was already starting to hesitate and be like, this just doesn't feel right. Especially when it was so many lateral moves. So I applied to masters, sometimes got in, sometimes didn't, and then went this isn't it. And then applied to different jobs, had interviews, and it just didn't work out. It was that's not it either. And every time that would happen, I'd go, if this doesn't work out, I'm going to be a massage therapist.
Yeah.
And then we're in the thick of the pandemic. I'm in my home office at the house, just feeling blah about my job and applying to something. And then the light bulb went off where I went, oh my God, I've been saying this for 10 years. It was in high school. I had started to say, if this doesn't work out, I'm going to be a massage therapist. It was okay, what am I doing? So yeah, in the middle of this pandemic, I go to my spouse and yeah, hi. I'm leaving my government job with a pension and I'm gonna be a massage therapist, okay? And he was all for it, supported me along the way. And yeah, so started the program at Fanshawe, which was great. Finished and have loved it ever since.
I love it.
And then, I mean, how I got into riders specifically, like
Yeah.
that was just really natural, really an organic transition. It was at my schooling was at the point in COVID when you only had like you had your circle of three people
Yeah.
or four people or whatever it was. So it was my spouse, my Nana, and a friend that I ride with. And so naturally, I'd come home from school and need to practice on somebody. So it ended up being those three people. And the friend that I was riding with, she started to say, like, wow, I feel so much better when I'm riding. Or like, wow, I have way better access to my body while I'm riding. I'm not sore when I get off. I'm not sore at my desk job. And it, again, like light bulb went off where I was like, okay, am I onto something? And so asked around, there was definitely some interest in it. And so by the time I was regulated and had my license, I thought like, what am I like, why not? Let's dive right into the deep end and see what happens. And so it's been awesome. Like it clearly was a need that hadn't been met yet. And my business continues to grow super organically. And I'm helping so many riders, and I just didn't even know that that was possible. So
And
yeah,
it's
pretty
so
cool.
fun because I know like you and I again both talk about like as the questions ourselves we're like, oh, like my horses were like they need massage, they need osteo, they need chiro, I need to get my saddle fit, I need to like deep dive into like a nutrition program. And a lot of the time then you have this like very well maintained, cared for animal, but then you put a hot mess of a human on
Mhm.
top of that well balanced animal, and all of a sudden we're the ones throwing them off. And
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily I've worked with several people where they're like, oh, I've had all of this stuff done and like they still can't pick up like the left canter lead. And I watch them, I'm like, it's because the way your body is like rotated or like the way you're nursing that hip injury, you're still asking them for the wrong canter lead, even though you're asking them to go that direction.
Yes.
Where we can work through like the human imbalance, the human tension, the human baggage, then all of a sudden the horse is like, oh, thank you.
Yeah, no,
We're loosening
absolutely.
that hip up so it is available for me to go that way.
Yeah, your four-legged friend is like, about time.
Yeah,
Like, I've been trying to tell you this forever.
I'm not the hot mess they are.
Yes. And
That's
it's like, it is so interesting. And like, that's part of why I do what I do is like, people don't look at taking care of themselves in the same way. Like, it's so normalized when you own a horse to be like, you should be doing all these things. And it's like, if you're not, it's like, tisk tisk, like people do fully support this kind of like army behind their healthcare. And then there's this culture about like not doing that for yourself. Like
Yeah.
the running jokes you see about the like, I'm energized by a coffee and half the apple that I gave my horse. It's like, no, girl,
Yeah.
no.
You
Yeah.
need to help you too. But even just like the amount of like even like in this cold snap that we're in currently in Ontario, like people are like, oh, I put the heating pad on my horse beforehand, and then we did this like stretch to warm up, and then I did this with them to warm up, and then we did these stretches as like a cool down. And I was like, and what did you do for you? And they're like, I got on. It's like,
Right.
oh, that's an approach.
Right. And like,
But
I think a lot of people don't realize like you're a mirror of each other. Like,
yes,
if your horse is bulging their right shoulder, maybe check in what your upper right limb is doing too, or like what you're doing on your right side. Cause like more likely than not, like you're part or the whole problem.
yes, yes, yeah.
And then if you don't address it, then it becomes like this ever feeding thing, and like it can spiral to be something much worse for your horse, where all of a sudden it's like they're compensating for you on their whole left side or whatever, and then you've got a bigger issue. When really it's like if you address yourself, you can be a better support system to your horse because you have asymmetries, they have asymmetries, and of course they're never matching up. So like your weekends and their weekends, they're just it just makes it hard. Like you're trying to help them carry themselves and work in an effective way, but you can't do that if you're not also doing the same thing for yourself.
Exactly. And it's
Yeah.
always so different. Like I it's so fascinating for me. So I have the same osteo that works on me and the horse. And it was so interesting with my previous gelding. Him and I were screwed up in like the exact same way. We had the exact same like pattern. And I got to a point where like I was feeling so guilty because he was getting all this work done. He was then like moving a lot more evenly. I'm like, I keep putting him back in the same pattern because I get on with that same like stuckness through our right hip, this like left quadrant issue. And I'm like, I'm putting him back into that same pattern. So that's when I also started to take like a little bit more seriously my own stuff because again, I'm sitting over here preaching this. Was I against myself? No.
Yeah.
Getting the body work done, but it was so fascinating. Like when I actually started doing a warm up like myself to specifically, again, the motivation behind it was still the care of the horse. But I started actually doing like, oh, let's see if we can get this looser in me before then I bring that baggage onto you. And that's when I really started to notice like his structure even out. And then it's interesting, like my new mare, we do not have the same issues at all. And it really shows like my imbalances versus her imbalances before I could just work with his imbalances because they were the same as mine. But a lot of the time they don't link up. It's like they go better to the left, I feel better to the right, or whatever it may be. And it's so interesting now to be like, okay, I need to warm up slightly differently so that I can help her through this, this, and this. But
yeah.
comes
And
down
like, I wonder over time, like, because there's certain asymmetries in you, I wonder over time, like, as she gets more supple, she gets better balanced, etc. Like, what happens?
Exactly.
Because it is this ebb and flow. Like, you can have one thing going on, and then all of a sudden, curveball comes in, or like you change jobs, or some movement pattern you're doing all the time. Like, let's use desk work because that's really common. Let's say all of a sudden you do something differently. It's like it will change the way that your body is moving and gliding, and then that translates into the saddle as well.
100%.
Yeah, but I also like, just to backtrack, I like how you said like that your horse was kind of the instigator to getting you to like really do your own homework, like we preach to other people, same. But like I look at that as a benefit, like humans are really guided and like motivated by external factors, that's why like in the spring all of a sudden you're like, I have to lose X amount of weight because all of a sudden I have to wear a bathing suit. Like it's just innate, like that's something that's really motivating for us to have external factors be the push. And I see our horses as like, that's good. Like I can be like, if you do this, your horse will have this outcome, because you're taking care of yourself. And it means people actually do their homework. It means they actually show up for themselves. And so like I kind of lean into that a little bit when I'm helping people.
I recently did a post of like why I like working with equestrians. And like one of the main reasons is they have a bigger why to do this, that, or the other than themselves. And it means they're going to be more motivated because it's not necessarily about, oh, this will make me feel better. It's this will help my horse.
Yeah.
In return, they do feel better, and that's great. But it is a much bigger than them reason to show up. And it means they're more willing to do the work.
Yeah, exactly. Love that about our horseback riders.
Right? I know.
Yeah.
So what's when you're doing a session with someone, when you're approaching a treatment program with someone, what is one of the biggest things you want them to take away from your sessions?
First being it's all about you. So like even in your first appointment, we go through a pretty in detail assessment. So like we have a sit down chat first. We talk about like health history, if you have any medical conditions, how is it affecting you specifically? And then we do a physical assessment and we come up with a game plan where I'll say like, okay, here's what I see. Here's what you feel. I'm thinking let's tackle A, B, C first, and we'll eventually get to D. But even with that being said, like we can have this great game plan. And then one day you might come in and be like, yeah, this other thing, or like my stress right now is 12 out of 10. It's like, okay, all that goes on the burner and we're going to focus on this today. So like, it's very like, we have goals, we have intention on what we're doing, and that makes it really measurable to make sure we are actually hitting those goals and intentions, but it's about like meeting you where you're at. Same with like, like again, like I work with beginners. I also work with high level athletes in our horse world. And so sometimes like people don't have any foundation of health. Like they just don't have consistency in their sleep patterns, the way they eat, what they drink, their exercise outside of horses. And so like if I don't help them develop a foundation, like it doesn't matter how many stretches I give you,
Yeah.
that's not really going to help. It doesn't matter if I try to throw a huge workout program at you, that's not going to help if we don't have the foundations there. Versus the other people where they're doing a decent job, they've built a lifestyle where it's pretty healthy, like I can do little tweaks. So it's always about like helping you for where you're at.
And that's, I have people who come in and they're like, oh, like, what's the plan for today? And I'm like, I don't pre-plan. There's no point. Anytime
Mhm.
like, oh, we did this last time. I would love to play with this on this time. And then all of a sudden they're hobbling in. They're like, oh, so I fell off yesterday. And I'm like, okay,
Right.
so like all that goes out the window. So there's
Yeah,
always just like consistent goals that we're working towards, but you have to meet each person where they are that day. It's, yeah, I love it.
exactly. Exactly.
So
Yeah.
I know
And
when you and I, oh, sorry, go ahead.
oh no, that's okay. You go first.
No, I was just gonna say like what I this was your idea and I loved it. Where like we were trying to plan like what our theme for like our chat was gonna be and what we wanted to touch on. And I know you and I are both like very passionate in in
Mhm.
our beliefs of like health and wellness. And we had talked about doing like a myth debunking session. And I was so pumped because last time you and you were, I think you were here or whatever it was. And we were like going on this like long tangent about a few things. And we're like, okay, this is what we're going to talk about. And
Yeah,
we're like, both you and I, this is slightly out of our comfort zone because it comes a little bit more from like our opinion, which is always a little bit scarier to put out there because then people can argue with us.
yeah, yeah,
That
for
feels
sure.
scarier than the things we're like, no, I know this for sure.
Yeah.
But I feel like it will be fun to do it together, even though I know like both of us, like when we logged in, I'm like, I'm a little uncomfortable.
Yeah. No, definitely. I mean, it's good to have the like organic conversations about these things because they're things you see, like we've got some cool topics to go over.
Yeah,
But the things you see on social media where there's like hard rules, it feels like, or hard opinions. And so like I'm glad we're gonna muddy the water a little bit. But yeah, I like the imposter syndrome was real this morning where I was like, do people want to hear what I have to say? Okay, we're doing it. We're doing it.
I do think we like both of us come in with just a little bit more of a refreshed, realistic approach instead. Like even like the homework I had given you to work on, you're like, do I do this every day?
Mhm.
I was like, oh my God, no, like that's not necessary. Like you could, but like 3 times a week is really great. Where like I think people have certain preconceived notions of like, oh, they were told that they need to do this, but
Yeah.
then they don't end up doing it because it seems overwhelming. So I think you and I both come in with a fairly like actually realistic approach to
Yeah.
fitness and bodies and maintenance and all that, so that we're setting people up for success versus making them
Yeah.
crap because they didn't maintain whatever. So
Yeah.
I think it will
And
be,
actually, like before we get into debunking, like I'm
yeah,
so big on home care
yes,
with my clients because it's like massage is awesome, but again, I look at you as like a whole person. So that's if I was like this 1 hour treatment once a month is going to solve the world's problems, it won't. That's like
yeah,
going to the gym once a month and being shocked you don't have a six pack.
yeah,
Like it doesn't work that way. Like it takes small incremental changes over time and being consistent about those things to make change happen.
yeah.
And so yeah, I mean, I'm very big on the home care part, but I make home care that is specific to you. Like some people, it starts off with like, add one more glass of water a day,
Yeah.
you know, or like, let's get a little more consistent in a bedtime routine. And people will be like, what does that have to do with my back pain? And I'm like, well, actually, a lot. Yeah,
Everything.
yeah, yeah. But we'll get into that.
I was gonna say that leads in perfectly because like the first thing I wanted that is always like I could rant about for a while is the like one size fits all wellness approach. And I say I use like wellness because for me it does like I tend to focus a little bit more on like the fitness aspect, but like you said, like I had a younger athlete, he's a hockey player, and we were talking about how he was like not having energy, not recovering well. So I technically do have a nutrition degree that I don't use, but I was like, oh, like what are you eating? And he was eating like a 50-year-old like woman trying to lose weight, basically, of like, oh, he had egg whites and he had like and like this, and I was like, like, buddy, go eat like a burger. Like, you need way more
Yeah.
calories. You need way more, like, you need carbs. And
Yeah.
but he, like, same thing, like he's getting all this information being spewed out there on like social media of like, this is what you should be eating, but it doesn't apply to everyone. So when we talk about like that one size fits all wellness approach, I'm talking about like the blanket statements of nutrition. I hate, my biggest pet peeve is like, oh, all equestrians should be doing this exercise. And I'm like,
Yeah.
well, that doesn't apply. So it's a very big blanket topic that we're going to start with, but that like one size fits all blank period.
Yeah. I mean, like if you hear one thing from this podcast, it's that Band-Aid solutions don't work. Like
Yes.
at all, like even like if let's go to like one topic of like, let's say someone gets chronic neck and upper back tension. Is that because you're a mom carrying kids around? Is that because you have a desk job? Is that because you've got a 2-year-old mare that is yanking on the, like, pulling you across the arena? Like there's so many things it can be. But also like, what are you doing? So it's like looking at you as a whole. You can't take that and then be like, oh, this one stretch, totally fine. Like it's more like, let's find the root cause
Yeah.
and then how to avoid triggering behaviors, how to get you stronger for better resilience of those behaviors when you can avoid them. And yeah, I mean, it's just like, it totally bothers me when you see like tools that people are marketing and selling where it's like, this thing saves you, or this individual stretch is the best. It's
Yeah.
like, mm-mm.
This
First of all, like
one stretch is going to cure all your low back pain. And I'm like,
yeah,
if you don't understand why that person has low back pain, like it might not, like back to your like neck example, like a lot of the times I find people's neck pain is not actually neck. Their neck is a symptom from other things happening in their body. And
yeah,
we actually need to work on this position or strengthening through the body. And you and I have both done like posts before talking about like, just because something feels tight doesn't actually mean you need to stretch it. Most of the time, I want to say you actually need to strengthen it. So going
yeah,
through
me
the
too.
post of like, oh, this one stretch will fix all low back issues. Like I have low back issues. I also have a fused spine. So
Hmm.
most of those quote unquote stretches, I should
Right,
be doing those.
right. Like
But
if
if
you
I
have a
don't know
fused
that
spine,
information, then
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, like if you have a fused spine there, you are like physically restricted in certain ranges. That means we got to get a little more creative on
Yeah.
how to like have movement in certain muscle structures or other soft tissue structures so that they stay healthy and aid you, not hinder you,
Yes.
you know? Yeah, but also like I think too, like when we look at the body, it's so complex. Like there are a million things happening at once. And so when you see like a Band-Aid solution, like it's not going to work because it's not looking at how the body's functioning, Like even like let's just talk musculoskeletal system. So that's your bony anatomy and your all the soft tissue, so muscle, tendons, ligaments, fascia. That like we used to have really outdated understandings of the body would be that we are like a stack of bones and our soft tissue makes this like push pull lever system. Yes, there's a lever system, but that's not inclusive enough of like what's actually understanding. Like new understandings of anatomy is that we are a tensegrity structure, which is that we are this suspensory system. So there are like rods with resistance bands between, like you can think of kind of like a prism that has these big bands with elastic bands between. If I start to like pinch some of the elastic, it's going to bow somewhere else. If I pinch elastic over here, it bows somewhere else. And that's really helpful to understand the integration of fascia, especially, and how that interacts with our body, because we are not just bone and muscle. Like there is this whole network of systems working simultaneously, and it's freaking beautiful. It's so
Yeah.
cool. But like when you're like, if you're just trying to be like, your neck pain is because your trap is tight, like, think again. Yeah, this is why you need professionals to help you understand the why on what you're doing.
I had one client who sees you and
Mhm.
they were like, yeah, she was like pulling on my leg a lot. And I don't understand why that was supposed to be helping my neck. And I was just like, okay, so this is why.
Yeah.
because like that whole system is a whole chain that's connected. It's not just this connected to this. It's the whole
Yeah.
system is interlinked with different tissues, and
Yeah.
we need to look
But
at
like I
them.
think it's going to be clear over this podcast. I love to talk about anatomy. Like I'm a total geek for it. So like I love when people ask me questions to be like, why are you yanking on my leg right now?
Yeah,
And I'll be like, let me tell you, here's
yeah.
what we found. So fun.
It's so fun. And like
Mm.
the more people can understand how their whole system works, the more it's going to change their approach and their how they view certain things. But yeah, that one side, like for me, every time I scroll on social media and there's like, oh, all equestrians should be doing this, all people with like low back pain should be doing this. And like until you understand, like again, there's always that little bit of an aspect of like chicken and egg of like what comes first, but until you understand how that whole system works together, what other restrictions they have, and like even just I work with quite a few clients who are especially equestrians for some reason that are very hypermobile, and like that's a completely different approach to someone who isn't hypermobile or has like regular reoccurring like proprioception through their body. If you're hypermobile, your body doesn't have the same proprioception of where it is in space as someone who isn't hypermobile. So
Yeah.
it's a there's no one size fits all. There's no you should be doing this exercise because you're an equestrian. Every program that you do, every program that I do, especially for like private clients, is very individualized of this is designed for you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's definitely like some similarities, like when I'm working with jumpers or I'm working
Yes.
with dressage or I'm working with my barrel racers. Like there's definitely a couple things that are similar when
And
you're in
what
the
their
same
body is
discipline.
required to do in order to achieve
Right.
their goal. Yes, yes.
Right. But like if I was to think about like one exercise that I would give everybody, I would be hesitant to do that, but I would probably gravitate to breath work. Like it
I
would
mean,
be some,
if you take one thing away, it's breathing.
yeah, yeah. No, for sure. Like so underrated. Breath work is like very important for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
I've talked about the diaphragm before, but like diaphragm is a muscle that makes like a dome shape under your lungs and it contracts. And when it pulls, it creates a pressure system, which helps to inflate your lungs. That's how it works. That's how you inhale. There's other structures that are involved, but that's the primary mover. When it relaxes, it takes the pressure system and then the lungs will collapse and you exhale. Um, Diaphragm is like innervated by autonomic fibers, but it also has parasympathetic fibers. The parasympathetic fibers are what we call rest and digest. And so you can use breath work to stimulate, like it can be this reverse method where you can stimulate rest and digest by doing breath work. And that is very important when you're on 1,000-pound animal and it's never your turn to freak out. So it's like I like to teach it for that case, but also for most anatomy, again, like even when we're talking about like not one size fits all, it's the same with like not everyone's anatomy looks identical either. Like there's lots of variances, but for most people, there are some of your hip flexor, like if you're a rider and you have social media, you've probably heard a lot about your psoas. That's one of the hip flexors. It does actually have fibers that along the back of the diaphragm, they intertwine and lace up a little bit. So they are directly connected. And so that breath work also is really like influential potentially on your psoas.
And then
So there's
pelvic floor with like the relationship of diaphragm with pelvic floor. And I think I could talk about pelvic floor for a very long time, but I think there's a notion of people like who have a uterus and a pelvic floor and that whole system working together. They think if they haven't had children that their pelvic floor should be fine with no issues. And especially with equestrians, when we're sitting on a bouncing objects multiple times, I find quite a few of my clients who have hip discomfort or hip pain, I send them to a pelvic floor health specialist and they're like, that was like a vice grip of a pelvic floor. I'm like, I know.
yeah, totally.
That's my scope of practice. I know enough of when to refer them to someone. but even just that relation of allowing diaphragm to get that full expansion and contraction, it sits over top of your pelvic floor, their little buddies. So the more you can allow that to expand and contract, the more that the pelvic floor can give and release and not hold a vice grip.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the diaphragm, so like obviously diaphragm creates pressure system for the lungs, but diaphragm and pelvic floor encases all of your digestive organs, like pretty much all other organs.
Yeah.
And so when diaphragm is filling, so going flat, so does the pelvic floor. And when the diaphragm relaxes, so does the pelvic floor. So it's constantly doing this bowing system and maintaining pressure through the abdomen. So that again, yeah, like I also like definitely have people that have pelvic floor issues. I don't do internal pelvic floor work, but I would refer them to physios for pelvic floor when it's applicable.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's your conclusion of not one size fits all. Every one of us is super individual. We have individual things that we need to be working on. Our systems are not all the same.
No.
Please seek out individual approach when able.
Yeah.
And for me, like the one thing that I do come back to, like back to social media saying like, oh, all questions should be doing this. There is something to be said for just getting your body moving. So if you are doing the every question should be doing this program, is that the best, most ideal exercise for you to be doing? Maybe not. But if that means that you are moving your body outside of riding and it's motivating you to do something for your body and just get the system moving, I would still always rather people do that than nothing. So depending on what's available for you in terms of like your financial access, your time access, if that means you're doing something, say, well, do I want to touch on CrossFit? I don't know. But I have very strong opinions of CrossFit, but I love how much it got women in the gym lifting heavy weight.
Yeah, for sure.
So do I agree with all of their approaches? Absolutely not. But do I love that it got people in and motivated to get into lifting weights and have that be celebrated that women are getting stronger versus like skinnier and fitter? I love that. So there's always things that I would prefer. If that means that you're moving, great. Would that be my first choice for you? Probably not, but that it gets you moving.
Yeah, and you can tweak. It can always be little things, you know. But yeah, it's like you got to find activities that you genuinely enjoy. And like, I mean, even like I was not somebody who ever considered cross training to be beneficial. Like until again, I was in university, like very active. All my hobbies are active. I felt like that was sufficient. Like I had never actually stepped into a gym until first year university. And I was like, okay, what do I do here? Like I had no idea what I was doing. And being a competitive dancer for 20-ish years, I just would go to the gym section where it's like they had like the volleyball nets and whatever, and I'd find a corner and I would do my strength and conditioning stuff that I'd done for years as a competitive dancer. As I got more brave, I went out and started spin, and then I'd play around with CrossFit. Sorry, Megan.
It's not, I don't dislike it. I just have some of the culture of pushing your body past what it should be pushed. My biggest beef with CrossFit is the term that they use all the time saying it's functional fitness. And that's, I think where my biggest like hang up is because it is not.
No, I mean, maybe equestrians might push a tire around, but
but other than that, it's for like my day-to-day people of like what they need their life to look like and what they need their body to do. That it's not in the same level. Like to a certain extent, yes, if you're helping your neighbor push their car out of the snow, like yes, there's that push factor, but it's just that's I think where my biggest hang up is.
Yeah, agreed. But yeah, I started with what I felt comfortable with, and then I started to bridge into other things I was comfortable with. I ran for a little bit. Like I've kind of dabbled in all these different things. Right now, I'm very much into strength training. I'm liking it a lot.
So fun.
Part of that's because I've like graduated to it because of my job. Like my job also that I have to make myself and my health a priority. So like looking at like I'm a hypermobile girly. So it's like, so stability for me is going to be crucial for injury prevention. So it's like building a health like my healthy lifestyle has to include things that are about injury prevention because I do a lot of like overuse, potential injury type of work, and then being hypermobile. So it's like, yeah, but like all of that has been a learning curve. So you got to find the exercise you like and then just let it guide you to what happens next. But like emphasis on like cross training is really needed for our equestrians.
Yeah.
Like riding alone is not enough if you want to be especially competitive,
Yes.
but also just to be proactive. Like we all want to be doing this forever. If you're like me, like I can't imagine a day that I'm not riding. This is part of how you do that.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
All right. So one of the things that you and I had like already kind of like, I think it was the first time I met you actually. You came to like the equestrians and biz, and I was teaching the math class, and we started doing a clam series. And I was like, for anyone who is on social media and has read that clams are absolute shit and doesn't do anything and they're not functional, blah, blah, like, I don't care what you think, we're doing them anyways. So one of the things that you and I talked about was like the fact that the internet is beefing on clams right now. So clam, for those of you who aren't familiar, it's if you're laying down on your side, if you've gone to any physio in the last like 20 years, there's a really good chance they gave you clams. But just lifting that top knee up, lowering it down, most people know what that is. So the internet is on a frenzy right now saying that it's not a functional movement. It's not the most like productive thing for you to be doing. And to a certain extent, I agree. But I think this is where it comes down to that individual approach of, I believe if I can't answer my clients as to why we're doing this for their body, then it's a stupid exercise. So for me, coming into a clam series, it is a great way to get people to understand what their glute med feels like, that outer portion of the hip, to get that activation. Glute med technically does most of its job in more of an upright standing position, or for equestrians in that seated position in the saddle. So yes, laying on your side isn't necessarily allowing your glute med to do its designed job, but it's a really good way to start to get that to activate, to understand what that feels like when you're activating. And then I usually take that to a more functional, I hate that word, I need something different, but I take it into something that's a bit more applicable. So for an equestrian, I might get them to lay down and try to get that activation through that outer hip, through a little bit of that glute max too. But then when you come upright, I want you to be able to recreate that same sensation when you're in the saddle, when you're walking, when you're stabilizing.
Yes. So, so like first and foremost, let's talk about glute med. So like you've got your pelvis and there's the rim like so. So that's the part, like if you put your hands on your pelvis, the rim is what you feel. Like those are the hip bones you feel on the side. So glute med comes along that, it goes along the border and then attaches onto your femur on the side. Its primary job is to balance the pelvis. So like if I stand or if I'm walking, it's keeping me going front and back, front and back, front and back. It also, if I lift a leg out to the side, it activates alongside some other muscles. If I added external rotation and lift, you're going to get a little bit more glute max than glute med. So glute med really, like, first and foremost, we use it for stability in gaits. And in the saddle, same thing. So like when I'm sitting there, its job is to keep my pelvis even across. So like if I put my hands on my hips, they should feel even, and sometimes it doesn't, but
a lot of times doesn't.
But that's first job. And then, again, in the saddle, like maybe when I'm putting one leg on, it needs to be activating on the other side. So if I put right leg on, left is activating to keep me upright. Same thing, like if I'm putting on like canter Q or shoulder in, travers, like she's working on both sides.
Yeah.
So that's like first understanding like what the anatomy is supposed to be doing. Sure, laying on your side and lifting your knee up is not functional. Agreed. Like we need to stop trying to call everything as needing to be functional.
Correct.
Like, and okay, I'm about to rant for sure. So
I'm ready. I've been waiting for this.
Okay. So, people, first of all, will say like a muscle's not activating. Muscles are always activating, but you might
puddle of mush when people are like, oh, my glutes don't fire. They fire. You would be a puddle of mush if your glute wasn't firing.
Yes. So yes, your muscles are activating, but you're going to have movement patterns or ways of recruiting muscles that might make you a little bit more dominant in recruiting something versus the other. So like when I see people, especially like they're having issues getting level and staying level in the saddle, especially when adding aids, like one of the first things I'm looking at, depending on how you're sitting, is like what glute med is doing. And a lot of the time she's one of the last to join the party. And so yeah, she's active, but like not functional for how we need to use it,
Not
right?
firing
So
optimally is it's
yeah,
firing, but not as optimally as it
yes.
to or could be.
Yes. So like this really comes down, this is not just clams, this is all exercises. It comes down to knowing your why.
Yes.
Know when to use something. So like clams, if like you can change leg position so that you add in a little bit more TFL or you add in a little glute max, or you can do not completely isolate because again, everything is working simultaneously. You can't completely deactivate one muscle to activate another. Doesn't work that way. But while you're sitting, you can change leg position and activate either more glute med and get you to start to feel the burn in that area. That's bringing a lot of like mind body connection so that you can understand like, oh, this is the part I need to be feeling. If I can get you to feel it, then we can translate to functional exercises and make sure that you're still feeling it. Then I can get you in the saddle and make sure you're still feeling it. And just being able to like use your body more effectively.
And
But
that's
clams
like,
apparently are not bad.
but and that's where I think like I differ, you differ from like a riding coach because I had someone who came in and they're like, my coach says I need to turn off my hip flexors and turn on my glute, and I was like, that doesn't work. That you if you turned off your hip flexors while you're in the saddle, you are going to face plant and you will not be getting back up.
Yeah.
So this is how we can get more support through that glute and more support through like hamstring and adductor with less of that main mover being your hip flexor, but it's never about this doesn't fire and this needs to turn off. You never, nothing should be turning off in your body. You're going to fall off.
Like even if you tried, it won't happen. Yeah. Even
Even
when
if
you're
you
asleep, things are still firing. Like they are, everything's always holding tension because tension isn't inherently bad. You
yeah,
know, like people come in and they're like, I have so much tension in my shoulders. I'm like, it's just not the appropriate amount. It's sending pain signals. So like let's
exactly.
let's balance things so that it is holding tension. But like if it had no tension, it's limp. Like you
Yes,
have no muscle. Like that's somebody who's paralyzed. Like
yes,
there's if it affects motor fibers, you know? So yeah, I mean, like back to clams, know your why. And this is for like all exercises. I try to help people understand like why I might be advising them to do it. But
yes.
there's also times when I'm like, yeah, no, this isn't the appropriate exercise for you. Like
Percent.
people who have like bursitis or an irritation in the lateral hip on your greater trochanter, like that's not ideal to lean on it
Yes.
or to be like constantly moving fibers over top of that bony
Pinch, pinch,
projection.
pinch, pinch.
Right.
Yes.
Irritate, irritate,
Yeah.
irritate. All of a sudden there's inflammation and it feels worse. And we're going like, why is nothing working? Right. So like you got to know your why, but you also got to know when to avoid. And you have to be able to understand when to load and what kind of progression looks like based on what your goal is, what the outcome should be.
Yes.
Yeah. And prepared to pivot because all of a sudden you
Yeah.
get thrown a curveball and it's like, okay, that was a decent exercise and now it's a horrible exercise for you. So don't ever do it again.
Like
Just kidding.
people come in if I have like a certain idea of like, so on paper, this should be a great approach for you. That doesn't necessarily mean when we try to apply it in real life that it's going to work. So if I'm taking you through an exercise and I'm all of a sudden like, you know what, never mind, we're gonna, like you said, pivot. Especially riders because they're so bloody competitive. They're like, no, I can do it. I'm like, I know you can. This is not the best course of action for you and your body, specifically where you are in space right now. So it's not you doing it wrong. It's just, it looks great on paper, but when we actually apply, your body isn't responding the way I want it to. So we're going to try
Yeah.
a completely different approach.
Yeah, like I'll
Yeah.
have this like I'll go through the treatment and be like, okay, this is the home care this time for
Yeah.
sure. I get them to do it and I'm like, do it 5 times. I'm like,
None.
are you feeling this yet? And they're like, no. I'm like, okay, well then that's clearly not the right home care for
Yes.
you. So
Not the
yeah,
right approach.
yeah, the pivot's really important for sure.
Yeah.
Even still, it's like I'll say, like, please do this at this load at this intensity until I see you next. And it's like, but if something changes tomorrow and all of a sudden this hurts, or all of a sudden this isn't feeling right, like don't wait till the next appointment.
Don't suffer in
No.
silence.
Yeah. A, stop. B, email me.
So one of the things we had chatted about was posture, the notion that people think posture equals pain. And the two things that came to mind for me, so like the video won't necessarily be posted, but like the amount of times I've shifted my position in just the time we've been recording this is like I'm sitting in something that someone like the position I'm sitting in right now, someone would be like, oh, well, that's why you have hip pain. Like, no, actually, this is a position that I can find where I don't have hip pain. But my approach to posture in general is I don't believe there's such thing as bad posture. I believe it's the duration in which you're holding the posture. So my little ADHD brain never sits long enough in a position for it to be a thing. And like people who ask me like how they should be walking and like their gait approach, and I try to really stay clear of trying to say what it's supposed to look like and stick with this is what it should feel like. So the like static posture, I don't think, in my opinion, there's such thing as a bad posture. It's just the duration in which you're holding it. But one of my favorite things, like when I'm working with equestrians while they're riding, is a lot of the time I get people like the cue that I use is like make it ugly for a second. And people who like lock and load through their lats, I'm like, I want you to, you're going to feel like you're slouching. You're not actually slouching, but you might feel like you're slouching, but it's okay if it's ugly for a second in order to find that firing pattern that is a little bit more desirable. So I find the same thing like with people sitting on a couch. They're like, how should I be sitting? I'm like, if you are sitting always like with your legs tucked under your left sit bone and you sit like that for 2 to 3 hours, that's going to have repercussions. But in terms of if you sit like that for 3 minutes and then you flip and you have your legs the other way, I'm not worried.
No, then we call it mobility work.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, I think like when we say posture, like, and I say we as in healthcare
Yeah.
professionals, say posture, like we look at it differently
Yeah.
than Joe Schmo on the street. And so, like, I think a lot of times people equate posture to skeletal anatomy. And like, there was old research that talks about that was trying to jump to a conclusion to be like, if there's abnormalities in skeletal anatomy, then that equates pain. Like, it was supposed to be this like equal correlation across. Not true at all. Like, I have people come in all the time and they're like, my back pain's because my posture's so bad. And I'm like, what do you mean by
What
that?
do you
And
mean by
it's,
that?
oh,
Yeah.
I have such a big curve in my upper back. I'm like, yeah, that doesn't count. Oh, I have such a big curve in my lower back. Yeah, no, that doesn't count. So it's like we need to stop looking at it or like allowing people that aren't educated about the body to continue to believe that, because what is pain proving is our emotional connection to it.
Yes.
So it's like if I think my curve in my back is causing my pain and I truly believe that, and then I kind of dwell in the way that that feels, you're going to have pain. Is it the fact that you have that curve there? No, not at all. But the other part too is like when I look at posture, like our bony and soft tissue, so again, tendons, ligaments, muscles, fascia, like everything in our musculoskeletal system needs movement to function properly. So like they do not on a physiological level function properly if you're not moving. So
Yes.
it's like I use this visual for my clients all the time. If I made a fist and I hold that fist for as long as possible, at some point my hand is going to cramp.
Yes.
Because your body's designed to say, holy shit, move already.
Yeah.
We need to get blood flow and all these other like great things happening in that area. You're not allowing me to do my job. Let's go to a global idea of that. Sitting at a desk for 8 hours a day. There was this original idea about like work ergonomics. You need the 90 degrees at the elbow and the shoulders back and chin tucked in and feet flat on the floor and knees are at 90. No, that is not perfect desk posture at all. What
So
I
rigid.
encourage people to do is get up as frequently as possible. Like even when they started to roll out sit stand desks, I was at my desk job at that point.
Yeah.
And people, including myself, because I wasn't educated about this yet, would sit for seven, stand for one. It doesn't work like that. You're still sitting static for 7 hours.
Yes.
And like, even like I get asked all the time, like, oh my God, you must be so sore. Like you have such a labor intensive job. I've never felt better. I actually had significantly more back pain when I was at my desk job than I do now. And it was part of the deciding factor about me changing jobs. It was like being able to transition to be a massage therapist. I got better work-life balance so that I could take care of myself better because that like sitting was so bad for me. Like I couldn't manage my weight. I was super lazy. I didn't have any ambition to work out. Like I would even drag my feet going to the farm at times. Like it's just like we need to change. It really wasn't good for me. I needed a full life overhaul. But
But
yeah, back. Oh, you go first.
no, I was just like during like the middle of the pandemic, I had all of my clients switch to Zoom, which worked super well for them. And like me, obviously, I would have been able to work without that. But then my whole day was sitting in front of a desk, which I have never done because I'm very involved with all of my sessions. I like to stand, I like to move around, I like to have hands-on approach for people. And that's when like I had the most pain and discomfort was when my whole practice was online. And now it's I would say like I don't know, maybe a fifth of it is online now, and everyone else is like either in barn or in studio so that I get to move around. And yeah, everything just feels so much better. And like back, like I have chronic hip pain on my right side, and everyone's like, oh, that must be so hard when you're standing. I'm like, no, I feel it in my online sessions when I'm sitting. And that's why I flop around like a fish out of water because I don't feel it when I'm standing. I feel it when I'm sitting for long periods of time.
No, you are designed to move.
Move.
And especially like, so if somebody sits for 7 hours and then they get up and they're like, oh my God, I feel so stiff. You feel like what you need to do is keep sitting.
Keep
That's
sitting.
actually, I mean, again, there's always like the odd
Different.
person and
Yeah.
circumstance. This can be a different answer, but like 90% of the time, it's mechanical back pain and you actually need to work out a bit. Like you
Yes.
need to go exercise and get moving and help the tissue rejuvenate and get those healthy processes going.
Yes.
Like there is your like so a lot of times this like forward shoulder posture, like there's some tissue I feel in those upper back areas that is like totally lost elastin. Like there's no recoil there, etc., because your body ends up laying down more of a collagen layer to have better resilience for this constant posture. But then that ends up just not feeling good. So
Yes.
it's like you got to rejuvenate to like do things that are going to build more elastin in as a ratio in the like tissue structure that's there, and it'll help for things to actually like move and glide instead of being matted down.
100%. Yeah. It's the like it always I had an instructor who used to say it all the time, but like motion is lotion. And it like it used to be like so cringy. I'm like, we need to find another way to say that, but it's you need to move. Like the more you can keep everything moving, the more your system will be able to speak together and work through its own issues versus just sitting.
Yeah. I mean, like, even if you're acutely injured, like you have some sort of soft tissue injury, it used to be RICE. Like, you've probably heard of RICE, where it's rest, ice, compression, elevation. Very outdated. Like, please stop doing that. First, consult your healthcare professionals and so that you have a guided recovery. But that's really like not how we handle soft tissue injury at all. So sprains, strains, fractures, etc. That's not how we deal with it at all anymore. It's about like maintaining pain-free range of motion. You need to avoid anti-inflammatories because inflammation comes to heal. If you're taking things that prevent or limit the amount of inflammation, you're dragging out healing. Use heat and ice, but in short durations, because if you use too much ice for too long, you're pulling inflammation away. If you're using too much heat for too long, you're pulling too much inflammation and it makes it feel worse. But yeah, it's this like progressive loading. Like if you think about if you've ever broken anything, you have these like innate things that you do where you're like, let's say I broke a finger, like you kind of can't help yourself but move it. It's a good thing.
Yes.
Like your body is smarter than you think it is. And so it's like it's moving you to that point of pain. And eventually you're going to gain all the range back. So this like old concept of rice of like, don't move it, isolate it, make sure no swelling goes there. It actually drags out healing and ends up creating more complications in your healing journey than it needs to.
One of the things that I found so funny and like just summarized why people just need to do what feels best for them is they're like, as that started to kind of get debunked of like, you actually shouldn't put ice on an acute injury was the exact same time that ice baths became super popular. And I found it so funny because there's like this side of being like, no, like you need that inflammation that's like helping your body heal to bring more blood flow to like the injured area. And then at the same time, it was like, you should do a cold plunge for like 2 to 5 minutes because it will help take all the inflammation of your body away. But I just found it so funny. It was literally at the exact same time that those two things started to like get more popularity. I was like,
Yeah, way to confuse
so
people.
that like you just have to see what works best for your body. Like, does the cold plunge actually make you feel better, or do you just feel really cool when you're doing it? Or like,
Yeah.
do you actually feel better if you go into a sauna? And like, does that actually help your body to feel better? And like, I have people ask me all the time if they should be cold plunging versus sauna, and I'm like, see what feels better, because I have one client, I would love for them to be able to roll, like take a little crossball, take a foam roller. It just makes so much sense on paper that that should be a good thing for their body. We've tried using lighter tools. We've tried like doing against the wall so it's not intense. Her body recoils so violently from it, completely backfires, and she's so much worse off, even though I really think it would be good on paper. And so for her, even though like I and like every practitioner she's always seen has like, you should be rolling, it is not the best approach for her. Her body feels so violently and she's in so much pain after. So we figured out a different way of like, no, actually like putting heat on for short periods of time that actually makes it feel better. But I just, for people when they're asking what they should be doing, I'm like, what feels good for you? Cool, do that.
Yeah. The heat and ice debate, like there's some people that are like, never ice. I am so not that person. Like,
No.
research needs to ask better questions, but
Yes.
also like again, you need to know your why. You know, like if you were acutely injured, should you be ice bathing for long periods of time? No, probably not. You know, like there's other things that you should be doing instead. But like if you're doing it in a wellness realm and you love it, like it does release happy hormones and
Yep.
stuff. So go for it, you know?
But I also
Like
think
there's
it's so
no,
like there this is where like it's the whole body approach, because like if you have someone who's stuck in fight or flight and they're stuck in their parasympathetic like nervous system, putting them in a fight or flight situation of an ice bath, that's actually not productive for them. That's not productive for your nervous system. That's not going to help your body go in the like direction that you think it's going to. That's going to put you back further in your nervous system, which then is going to have a negative effect on your tissue, on your structure. So I don't, it can't be oh yeah, ice bath would be really good for you, but I know that you're working through some complex PTSD. So actually, I don't want to put you in an ice bath because that's not good for your system, because you can't regulate that.
100%. And like your nervous system is the captain of the ship. They
Yeah.
are the decider. Like, so it's like everything that you do, whether we're talking about manual therapy, like what I do, or exercise, or but like any kind of like ice bath, whatever, like it's always a communication with your nervous system,
Yes.
you know? So it's like you have to see what result comes from it. If you're not getting the right result from it, it's not the right modality at that time for you.
Exactly. Exactly.
And about when you were talking about the foam rolling, it made me think of one of my clients. So I did extra training in fascial work, and
Yes.
some fascial work is very slow, very light pressure. Like different fascial work can look differently.
Yes.
So I was trying some of this like very low, like low rate, very gentle kind of work with them, and their body was like,
No,
not
thank you.
happening.
No.
That created so much more resistance that I then
Right?
had to fight through. But like in theory, it's like I work through superficial layers, then I get access to deep layers, and they shouldn't be as sore. But this one particular individual, their body was so insulted almost that I had had to do lighter work where I was like, okay, I've got like in bold in their notes, don't do any of the gentle fascial work with them. It's a no-go.
So hard because like again, like when you start from like that textbook place, like on paper this seems like such a great approach, and that's where you have to, as a practitioner, you have to be able to pivot, because it's like, okay, that's a hard no. What what other approach can we access? And yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
One of the things we wanted to chat, I feel like we've touched on it a little bit, but like what is your core? And I know like we talked about like your diaphragm, we talked about its relation to pelvic floor, we talked about your relation to psoas, but I feel like when someone has a practitioner say, oh, you need to strengthen your core, they automatically just think of the muscles that make up like your quote unquote six pack muscles of that very superficial like access to your core, where like if I'm talking about core, I'm talking about like your multifidus, like in relation to like how it sits in around your spine. I'm talking about like internal and external obliques. We're talking about lats. We're talking about psoas. We're talking about hip flexors. So it's that whole like core cylinder of your body the whole way around, not just that front approach to your quote unquote six pack.
Yeah, I think core for like when I hear coaches say that or riders say that, like I think people immediately go to abs.
Yeah.
But for riders, like when I think core, I'm thinking like everything around the pelvis, everything through the abdomen, and like soft and gushy,
And that
not bracing.
not engaging your core. You don't need to engage. And like if anyone is thinking they're engaging their core, you're locking and loading, you're bracing, you're restricting that elastic ability of your body to go with the movement, versus like you become this brick, this like little bump on a log, instead of like going with the movement. So one of the
Exactly.
worst things for equestrians to do is thinking that, oh yeah, I'm really engaging this, I really feel this. Like there should be at no point like, yes, your muscles can fatigue. Oh, I feel my adductors, my inner thighs a little bit more because I've learned how to engage them. That's different than, oh, my abs are so sore because I didn't breathe through the whole session and I just held everything as tightly as possible. It's not the same thing.
I mean, like, so I'm a dressage rider. So, like, the only time that I really think about, like, for a millisecond, maybe bracing my core would be a half halt. But, like, majority, like, my horse is so on my seat that majority of my half halts are like, I just slightly slow the swing. Like, I slightly slow how much my pelvis is following him, and he will listen and be like, oh, hey,
Oh, you're
okay.
not on the same rhythm as me. Hold on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unless I have a fire breathing dragon, which does happen this time of year, he does listen pretty good. So like, yeah, I think even like in a lot of contexts, like jumpers are bracing going over the jump and landing. Like it's like we have to work more on teaching you how to use muscles eccentrically. So that's like in lengthened positions and still activating, but like not bracing and holding. Like if you can even just try it the next time you're riding where you hold your breath or like maybe you tighten your bum a little bit, the first thing you're going to do is start to bounce.
Yeah.
You know, like if go back to that like diaphragm and psoas in most other activities is a hip flexor. But when your hips are seated and stabilized in the saddle, it actually translates to being a spinal stabilizer in the front. So it's like you can't tense it up. Like all of a sudden your back's rigid, then the front of your hips are rigid, and then other things are going to start to lock down as well because it's like, oh, I feel unstable. And like our bodies again are designed like nervous system's the captain of the ship. Your innate reaction when things aren't going right is to pull your limbs in to your torso, right? So like as soon as you start to get too tense and too rigid and start to feel really unstable in the saddle, it's going to get worse because everything starts to shorten and your body's like, okay, when in doubt, bring the limbs in for protection. And that's like the last thing you should do. Yeah, that's the worst position. You're going off. Absolutely.
And that's where I usually start to like get into like my quote unquote argument of why cross training is so important. Because if you're trying to learn how to find that eccentric control, that lengthening control, but you're not used to it, and you're trying to figure that out while you're on 1,000-pound animal going over a jump, there's too many things to focus on. So that's where learning what that feels like off of the horse and having the confidence and that automatic firing pattern off of the horse then makes it easier to then put you on the moving bicycle with its own brain that is squirrely half of the time. And then it's easier to already have that pattern and to know what that feels like off of the horse. We're trying to learn new things like that, new muscle activating approaches, especially like I've been riding since I was 2. I have a bunch of bad habits because I just would get on with no tack and go out in the field bareback.
Yeah.
I have a very, very ingrained firing pattern of what I used to do. But as I get older, as my body has other things it needs to work through, as I play with horses with different gaits than what I'm used to, I need to be able to figure out how to use those muscles in those different scenarios. But I need to be able to feel confident on my own 2 feet doing that first before you throw in something with its own brain that makes it very poor decisions sometimes.
Yeah, no, totally. And like, I mean, like, let's be clear, like, what makes you a good rider is time in the saddle.
Yes,
But like, and some of the best riders that I know have never stepped foot in a gym.
yes,
But why, like, we spend so much time and money in this sport that we love and doing, like, spending the time with the horses that we love. So, like, why wouldn't you want to give it your all? Why
yes,
wouldn't you want to be the best passenger for your partner? Why wouldn't you want to be more coachable for your coach? Why
yes,
wouldn't you want to show better? You know, like it's just, it's, there's so many benefits to the cross training outside of what you're doing in the saddle.
100%.
Mm.
Yeah. All right. Lastly, no stirrup work.
Oh, okay.
So we are recording this in January, but I know every November I pretty much use the same post every year of like, y'all, please do not lock your stirrups away. And there's so many reasons. And to clarify, I'm not against no stirrup work. I'm against the all or nothing. You have done zero preparation. You have zero awareness of where you are in space without one stirrup, without 2 stirrups. So for me, it comes down to, again, that muscle overload and that muscle fatigue is if you haven't started to condition this throughout the year, and then all of a sudden your entire lessons for all of November or whatever it may be is no stirrups, that's a no-go for me because you don't have that awareness, you don't have that muscle firing pattern. And for me first, it's always the horse first. And in my opinion, that's not fair to your horse if you haven't figured out how to condition yourself, especially if you have a horse that's very aware. Like mine, like both of my horses have been very like, don't you dare fall. You need to figure yourself out up there. And like they both like take that very personally if I slip or lose my balance. So for them having me potentially not having that muscle activation to support myself and put additional stress on their body to brace and hold and lock and load because I haven't figured out how to find that like give and take of muscle activation when you're riding, that's not fair.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like I think like in the last 5 to 10 years, like no stirrup November was the be all end all. Like it
Yeah.
was like you have to be doing this. And I feel like almost there's this like swing of like I understand what you're saying, but there's been almost this swing of people being like, never do no stirrup November again, you know? And it's like let's not go polar opposites. Somewhere in the middle is the right
Somewhere in the
answer.
middle.
Yeah, but like I think too, this seems to be the theme of the podcast, know your why, you
Yes.
know?
Yes. Yes.
So, like, I mean, first and foremost, agree, like, your horse is not your personal gym. And if you don't have the foundation there to be able to sit and have stability and be an easy passenger, like, no stirrup work is maybe not the right thing to be doing at that point. But, like, I'm very pro no stirrup work.
I
Like,
start, if it's safe to do so, all of my biomechanics sessions, like on the horse, start with your feet out of the stirrups if it is safe for you to do so, so that you can allow that traction through your legs so you can better feel your sit bones without you having that feedback of fighting with your stirrup. That's how I get a lot of people to learn to connect to their feet instead of just fight the stirrup. But I start most of my sessions without stirrups if it's safe. Let the legs traction, better connect to your sit bones in the saddle, find that diaphragmatic breathing, and then see what it feels like to put your foot in. But I do incorporate a fair amount of either single stirrup work. I'm a really big fan of just taking with each
you.
stirrup because
Okay,
the
good.
horse stride is a little shorter. It's a little easier to keep up with that. But my biggest thing in terms of like just strictly biomechanics speaking is if you take away both stirrups, your body is still going to show up with the same muscle firing pattern as when you have both stirrups. It's a bilateral exercise. So I like to make it more unilateral. What happens if we take away this support? And for everyone, like if we're going to the left and I take away your left inside stirrup, that will present a certain way. It's going to show me how your body's trying to figure out how to compensate. And then it's going to feel like a totally different body when we go to the right and I take away your right inside stirrup. And that's where I can start to really see the imbalances of your firing pattern and how your body holds itself through space. Where one client, she looks the exact same without stirrups as she does with stirrups. If I take away one stirrup, all of a sudden she's like, I don't know how to do this.
No,
It's totally different. So again, like I'm not against no stirrup. I'm against we're just doing this because everyone else is doing this versus is this actually what is going to be productive for you, safe for your horse? And if the answer is, well, it's just because everyone else is doing it, that's not going to fly with me.
No, for sure. And like I also prefer taking one stirrup away versus both because it's like I think a bit of a misconception that by dropping both stirrups or even riding bareback that you magically will find symmetry. No, you can still be very asymmetrical bareback or without the stirrups. Yeah, exactly. So it's more, but like I also see it as a safety piece as well. Like how often do you drop a stirrup accidentally and then like can you pick it back up? So like I do it a lot at the walk work. Like I do this all year round. But I do it like I'll drop one, like let's say I drop my right stirrup, I'll do it in walk, trot, and canter in both directions.
Yes.
Because it's like in just a couple strides. But if I'm having an off day where all of a sudden I feel like I can't ride anymore, or like maybe it's super cold and my horse still needs time to warm up, like I'm not going to do it while he's cold backed.
Yeah.
You know? So it's like just understanding how to use the tool effectively for sure.
Yeah. And again,
like if you don't have a seat, don't go anywhere near no stirrup work yet until you're working on your seat.
Yes.
Like if you take any of your stirrups out and you're immediately bouncing, like there's foundations missing. We need to back up because we're starting with something that's too intense for you at this point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's all about helping, not hindering your horse. Like that's the point of no stirrup work. Like, are you being an easy passenger or not?
Are you creating more tension? And that's not going to help them be able to help move through space.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Any other comments? I always like to say like words of wisdom and then everyone looks at me like a deer in headlight, but like any other closing thoughts, comments, concerns?
First of all, this has been super fun.
Yeah,
I was thinking about like words of wisdom. I don't know if it's necessarily words of wisdom, but like something I live by as an equestrian and as a therapist is like when you know better, do better.
Yes.
Or like same kind of idea of the like if knowledge is power, wisdom is knowing what we don't know. It's this like our sport as well as my career very much are like always evolving. Like there's always something that you can do better. Like all of a sudden research will come out or someone will try something in a different way and it ends up being more effective. And so it's like to be a better rider for my horse Monty, like I'm always open and like continuously curious about what I can do in a way that's going to be more effective and better for him. Whether we're talking riding or just like being a good horsewoman and horse mom. But same with like therapy, like I'm very science and like evidence informed, and I do my best to be up to date on relevant research that's coming out. And when relevant research is done well and has a lot of substance to it that's really applicable to what I do, like I will pivot. I will take that research and make sure that I'm being the most like up to date and effective therapist that I can be. So I kind of always want to approach all of my worlds with that humility and like continuous curiosity. And I encourage my riders to do the same.
And it's like, for me, I'm kind of like, if I'm not cringing at what I did 5 years ago, and if I'm still doing the exact same thing and the exact same approach, like some of the foundations are never going to change. Like there's like the tried and true approaches to things. But I look at what I did 10 years ago and like, I'm grateful that a lot of my clients are still the same from that. But like, there's some other ones where I'm like, I'm so sorry that was my approach. I know so much better. Same with like things I've done with my horses over the last like 5 years, 10 years. Like, I'm like, I'm super sorry. If I had known all the things I know now, I would have done a completely different approach. But if you're looking at your practice and it's the same as it has been for the last 5, 10 years, you need to take a look at things that you can improve on, or are you up to date? Are you like, it has to be constantly changing. And for you and me, that's really fun. I think
Yeah,
like
it's so fun.
that keeps us engaged. We're so willing to be like, I know that's how I originally thought was best. I've learned better. We're actually going to start to do it this way and go from
Yeah, and I kind of see that as like a common character trait with riders is
yeah,
that like all it's what other like adult amateurs continuously do lessons. Like there
yeah,
is this kind of like continued learning that's this underlying value that we all have. So like take advantage of that, understand that that can translate to other parts of your life, including making healthy choices for yourself and your horse.
yes. I love it. Awesome. Thank
So
you so
fun.
much, Lauren. I appreciate you taking your time today. And yeah, I'll have you on again soon. We have so much more to talk about.
Yes, we do. So fun. Okay, thank you.
Bye.